Okay, so just as an initial disclaimer, I'm having space issues on this computer, so hopefully I'll not run out of time. If I do, I'll probably carry on doing another video. Because I think this is very important. I've just watched a video by Vice, the online news network, and they were covering a would-be standoff in Memphis, Tennessee in 2013. So the video's 5 years old, but I think that the issues are still very relevant. And basically, this was a proposed Klan rally in a public park in Memphis over local council plans to change the name of the park, which I understand had been named for the controversial Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest. So basically, this proposed Klan rally then attracted the possibility of a counter rally, organized by the leader of a local Crips gang, right? And this local Crips leader was trying to get together black gangs to come together rather than killing each other, his words, to counter the KKK. Now, the good news is it turned out there was no major violence because Mother Nature intervened. There was rainfall. So both sides didn't exactly back down, but basically the Crips gang leader stayed away because he felt, I guess, that the rain would put off the Klan members. Both sides were still very vocal, though, about their views. And the Klansmen insisted they're not racist, but then they came out with the usual, you know, mantra. I find a lot of Klan members, based on interviews I've seen, are actually just pretty ignorant. But it's important to look at the Ku Klux Klan in today's context. In a country of about 320 million people, the Klan is estimated to have less than 10,000 hardcore members. Now, that's not to say that those individuals wouldn't be capable of violence, but I do think you have to look at things in context. I believe America today has some very raw racial issues, which I'm going to be looking at, but I also think that it's a very different society from the society whereby black men would be lynched in public in front of mobs, for because they were accused of looking at a white woman. Certainly, that situation has changed. But I would also speculate that the situation in America today, or let's say from about the Ferguson unrest onwards, if we're looking at a very loose timescale, this sort of 5, 6 year period has been the most tense period of race relations in America, probably since the Los Angeles riots of 1992. So let's say roughly in a quarter century. And certainly the rise of Trump and Trumpism can be seen as a byproduct of that. And I think definitely part of the Trump campaign pandered to the far right. I think there's no question about that. But um, for people looking at this with a truly open mind, I don't think it's as simplistic as saying it's good versus evil. The truth of the matter is there is extremes on both sides. I mean, one thing I find interesting is any video about the KKK. I totally understand African Americans having strong views on them. I totally get that. I totally understand the sensitivities around that. But one thing I have a big problem with is people then going on to glorify the likes of the Crips and the Bloods. I mean, what have they ever done for society? Absolutely nothing. Um, I think one of the reasons that Martin Luther King was such an admirable figure is that he recognized it wasn't about black versus white, it was about challenging injustice, and he knew that you needed to reach out to wider society. I think from about the 70s onwards, certainly the Black Panther movement was part of the origins of this, but that militant, black Pan Africanism then basically translated into just organized gangs in cities like Chicago, St. Louis, New Orleans, and elsewhere. And I would not at all be surprised if far more African Americans are killed by other African Americans than either the police or white supremacists. And that's not to say, by the way, I'm not for a second downplaying police brutality. I think there is legitimate concerns there. I really do. And definitely white supremacist racism exists. But you know what? Black supremacist racism also exists. Hispanic racism also exists. But from an outside perspective, what I think a big part of the problem here is a lack of honest debate, because you have this strange combination of a very, very tense undercurrent of racial tensions, and yet also extreme political correctness around language. Not on the internet, on the internet you see all sorts of racial slurs, whether it be the M word or whether it be, I'm going to say it, cracker, but maybe we should be saying the C word. Maybe that should be just as taboo as the M word. I don't think it should be okay for people to throw around that word either. Um, I appreciate it doesn't quite have the same historical connotations, but there are obvious double standards when it comes to black racism. I mean, why is it okay for black racists to say they hate all white people and not be challenged in that mindset when Klansmen get rightly challenged in their mindset? And this is, I think, a big part of the problem with America. Although it's come a long way in certain regards, there is a tribalism there. And don't get me wrong, if you're American, I'm not smearing the United States. The United States is a great country, but let's be realistic. There are still very raw racial issues going on. This isn't everyone. There's plenty of people who don't look at race. They don't, they get on fine with their black or white or Hispanic neighbors. But I I think we also have to be honest and say, yeah, there is still some very raw racial issues there. And to those who think, well, this guy's an outsider, why does he care? The situation in the UK is nowhere near as pronounced, but I do see some of these movements starting to spill over. There has been, for example, Black Lives Matter. There has been that presence in London and Birmingham. Um, the racial issues in this country are not quite as pronounced, but they are there. And we would be kidding ourselves if we said that the situation in the UK was harmonious. It's not. It's not as bad as the US, but I see some, the history isn't the same, but I see some similar dynamics. I mean, in the UK, I would suggest there are real tensions between Islamist sympathizers and reactionary nationalist groups. So I think in the United States, it's 50 years since Martin Luther King was killed. In some ways, things have improved a lot, but in other ways, there are still some very real, raw issues. I think black civil rights movements make a lot of legitimate points about double standards in terms of how black people are approached. But a big problem I have with the likes of Black Lives Matter is they will not condemn black criminal activity. They will not condemn the Bloods or the Crips. Why not? Why not? Um, I really think there needs to be more honesty. And the problem is, there are too many people with tunnel vision. There's too many people who say, you're a white guy, so you can't say this. Now, if you're telling people that they can't have an opinion, if they cannot contribute to discussion because of the color of their skin, then it's going to create a really tense situation, because then people are going to get defensive and they're going to say, well, every American has a right to freedom of expression, which is something I believe. I believe every Briton has a right to freedom of expression. You cannot have a situation where you're telling people they can't have an opinion because they're white, or telling people that they're black, so they cannot be offended by the M word. Um, you have to understand the sensitivities around that because of the history. But America today, I don't think is America of the 1920s. I don't think, at that time, black people were being lynched in the street. It was stomach churning, the things that went on. But I do think that racism is racism is racism. There have been examples in recent years of black gangs who specifically targeted white victims, and the likes of CNN don't report that as racism. They don't discuss that sort of racism. Why not? Why is black supremacist racism given a free pass? So It's very noticeable when you look at opinions online. The tunnel vision, the tribal mentality that people have. I know I'd be wasting my breath telling these people to see people as individuals, but that is the only way that America's going to move forward. So anybody who has that tunnel vision of you white cis, you black lad, needs to be challenged. And I think if America's truly to go forward, then all violence needs to be challenged. I don't personally see the point of these standoff situations of, it's two extremes. What's the point? I'm just aware of time here. I could get cut off at any second. I don't see the point of these standoff situations. I get that it's to send out the message that white supremacy won't be given a free ride. Okay. But how do you counter white supremacy by then saying black power? What does that do? That targets all white people by saying that all white people are racists. These ignorant generalizations. That's just as ignorant as saying all black people are gang members, which of course they're not. In fact, black people are the main victims of black gang violence. And probably Hispanic people are the main victims of Hispanic gang violence. And as to white supremacy, I think there is, I don't think the KKK is as big a problem as some of these new neo nationalist groups, and certainly some of the Second Amendment extremists. I think that is a serious problem. So, yeah, I just think there needs to be more honesty, less political correctness, but also less tunnel vision. People need to have open and honest dialogue about these problems without automatically getting into you black people or you white people, the blacks, the whites, the Asians, the Hispanics. It just gets so, when you start going down that line, it becomes tunnel vision and it gets toxic. And I really feel, as an outsider, I find it depressing because I love the United States. I think it's a great country and I just find it sad to see this happening. Um, there is a lot of issues to address. There is injustice out there. But if your whole approach is collective vilification of an entire race, I have to say this particular Vice report was pretty measured. I'll put a link in this video because it's worth watching. But sometimes Vice does have a slight left-wing bias. The truth is, in the political arena, Trump has definitely pandered to white supremacists. There's no question about it. But the Democrats have also pandered to the absurd idea that criminals shouldn't be held to account. So people who are in the United States illegally, why shouldn't they? The idea that people can break the laws of the land and not be held to account is absurd. So, yeah, like I said, I see it coming into the UK on some level, though not as pronounced. But there are racial tensions here. We had the England riots 6 years ago. There were deaths in that. 5 people were killed, and there was a range of factors involved. And we have had racially motivated murders here. Recently, there was a discussion of having a Stephen Lawrence Day. Stephen Lawrence was a young black man killed by white racists. It's right that that is remembered, but people do not like double standards, and there have been examples of white people being targeted by South Asian racists. That doesn't get the same attention. So, that might be because there was inherent police racism as well. But I think if you're truly against racism, and this is the bottom line, if you're truly against racism, then you're against racism, period. I'm sick and tired of people promoting double standards. White supremacists, they claim they're not racist, but they come out with all this crap about being against mixed race couples. Um, and that's something I really take issue with white supremacists. But black supremacists, what do? They collectively demonize all white people. They say, you white cis, you white slut. Look at the comments online, it's full of it. I don't even like looking at videos sometimes, just seeing the sheer rubbish, the sheer, yeah, and it shows the sort of mindset that people have. I think there's probably no issue, even sexism. There's no issue out there that is as potentially toxic as race issues. So it comes down to everybody to really look at themselves and think, do I have a tribal mindset? Am I judging someone purely by the color of their skin? I really, really think that needs to be, drilled into the narrative in the United States. And unfortunately, I think the media's got a lot to answer for. I do think CNN and so on do race bait on occasion. I mean, CNN will never ever criticize black gang violence. Never. By the same token, Fox News will never condemn police brutality. So I think the media's got a lot to answer for as well. There needs to be open, honest discussion about the problems without just these lazy generalizations. Okay, I'm going to round it up there because I've said enough. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you live in a part of the US where maybe there is very obvious racial divisions, and let me know your perspective. I'm not going to censor comments, but you know, if you're coming out with like cracker or the M word or making lazy generalizations, I'm going to challenge you. If you want to have constructive dialogue or constructive contribution, please do. Because I don't believe every American has this mindset. Far from it. This is a country of 320 million people. I'm sure many Americans just want to get on with things, but unfortunately, these race mongers, and they're on both sides, all sides. I mean, just to close, I'll give one example because I think white supremacy is a real problem, but I would argue that black supremacy and Hispanic supremacy are being downplayed. I saw a video, a very unsettling video of a young woman, a Trump supporter. Now, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm sure I would disagree with her in many areas, but it was a pretty ugly scene. She was basically surrounded by a mob. Some were white, some were Hispanic, but they threw things at her. She was cornered. It was pretty ugly. You don't win debates by shouting people down, and well, my time's still going, so I'm going to keep talking. That's a problem. This mentality that you win arguments by just yelling at each other. That's why I don't see the point of these, demos and counter demos. What's it going to achieve? I get that it's to send out the message, oh, the Klan has no support. But what are you going to do? All you're going to do is make them more polarized, more angry,